I was I'm autistic myself, but a non-binary rather than a woman. I was wondering what the rate of comorbidity was like. I know it's only a sample of 10, but statistically, only one person attempting suicide is relatively low for autistic adults, sadly. So I was wondering what the rate of comorbidity of other things are. It sounds like they've had lots of stress and stressors, and what sort of things, and was this pattern, from what you could tell, typical of autistic women or not? Obviously, it's only 10 people, so it's hard to tell.
Yeah. Well, the comorbidities, there was one woman who definitely had a comorbidity of schizoaffective disorder, and there was a couple others who said back in high school that had been diagnosed as ADHD or as learning disabilities, but they had kind of felt that was actually a misunderstanding, that they really should have been diagnosed as having autism at that time. So they didn't see themselves as, they didn't say, I have that comorbidity. They said, to me, that's a misunderstanding. As far as typicality, to be quite honest, I mean, obviously, I advertise for people who've done well. So obviously, we had a purposive sample already right there. But just talking to them and dealing with many other women in life, and I deal with many other women that are successful. I think for women that have of a certain age that are doing well, they were very typical, because I've talked to many other women since then, and they tell me the same stories. And some of the women I work with on a day-to-day basis, and they're telling me some of the same stories. Now, certainly not representative of women who have had huge issues at home. And as I said, it is what it is. We can't go back in their lives, and as I said, what to me it was about critical things that happen along the way. So, yeah, I'm sure that the women that aren't successful, that are at home and are depressed and highly anxious, the question is that a comorbidity, or did they not have these things happen along their way? And as I said, I started with Temple Grandin, and watching Temple Grandin's story, the first decision that affected her life to me was her mother not putting in her institution. What if her mother had put in her institution? What would Temple have ended up like? So to me, it was an absolute testament to internal factors, but also these critical things that happen that shape their life.
Okay, thank you. A gentleman there has a question.
Thank you for the very enlightening talk. My question is about these women's social background, whether you could give more information about maybe their social class, and whether the traumatic events in their life or pivotal moments that you describe and the successes that follow because of, these are good stories, had made any changes towards their social mobility.
You mean the ability to socialize with others? Is that what you mean?
No.
So I'm having a hard time hearing. I'm sorry.
It's their social background, where they have come from in society.
Okay.
Is that their social background, their socioeconomic?
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, they came from it. Thank you. I'm sorry. It's really hard to hear. They came from a variety. Now, because they were all women that were fairly employed now, most of them were. None of them were well off. They hadn't come. Some of them had come from dirt poor backgrounds. They talked about that. A couple ladies one was still obviously getting disability payments. One other lady had been getting a pension, but she was working part-time as a fitness instructor. So some of them would certainly be low income now. Some were certainly middle income because of their jobs, but they came from a variety of backgrounds. They were all, the one thing I will tell you about the other demographics, they were not, we have a fairly diverse population culturally in Australia, and they were all white Australians. They weren't, there was a couple that were born in England, but they weren't born, I didn't have any I talked to were from Asian background or Indian, which we do have a lot of families from other countries in Australia. So they were all English speakers originally. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Is that Lona? Lona Roth? Yeah, can you get a microphone there? And
thank you for your very interesting talk. I just wonder, had you advertised for a bunch of successful neurotypical women, or without mentioning autism, how similar and how different their stories would have been, with the obvious exception that they wouldn't be describing autism diagnoses. But if you're talking about traumatic life events, self-efficacy, and so on, with a bunch of people who thought of themselves as successful, what are the distinctive features of this group?
I'm only going to guess on this. Now, I'm a neurotypical woman, so I'll use myself as an example, but I think if I talked to neurotypical women who are successful, I would get much more traditional definitions, job, marriage, because actually, ironically, these women freed themselves from the constraints that I think many women live under. So I know the research on women and how women define their success versus men, and it's, issues with, if you're not, mother and things we define as success. So I actually think it was very different, but it would be hard for me to say. I think these women, in some ways, had a much more freeing sense of things. They were less constrained. They were sort of like, nah, it didn't work. I'm going to go in a whole different direction. I'm going to define who I am.
Thanks. Let's broaden the discussion out then, and can I invite Helen Ellis, Judy Gould and Jackie Ashton-Smith to come and join us to broaden out the discussion?
Can I just add one thing?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention at the end, my email was up there, you're welcome to contact me, but I am now doing a study with men because I'm very interested to see what the differences are with men. And I can tell you, as I said already, the men are very interestingly different because they're less emotional, they're much more factual and analytical. It's very funny. And of course, I'm not a man, so I find it interesting to listen to him as a woman. But if you know any men that would like to talk to me, I'd love to talk to them.
The powers of technology tell me that you're coming to join us, Jackie, Judy, on stage. Yep. Okay. Would you like to get the microphone to the gentleman there? It's actually quite hard to see from up here, so if you wave, it's... yeah.
Hello, the talk was wonderful and inspiring. I'm completely freaked out by what I call maximally differentiated gender roles. Men are like this, women are like that. Men are not interested in emotions, women carve out. It's too... Surely you're being too black and white?
Yeah, no, I don't think it is black and white.
Much too black and white.
No, I don't think it is. And to be quite honest, talking to the men, I suspect I'm going to find more similarities than differences. What I found so far, it's just the way they talk that's a little different. I don't know the key findings will be different. We'll see. But I agree with you. It's not black and white. And certainly the research on individual in the spectrum sets, it's even less black and white. So, because those social roles that we play aren't as limiting, I think. As I said, these women, if I talked to neurotypical women, it would have been different in a way because I think they would have been more thinking about traditional roles of success, and these women weren't. Uh-huh. But I don't think
these women are brilliant, right?
Sorry?
These women are brilliant.
Yes, they were great. But I want to emphasize, I don't think they were smart women. I mean, of course, obviously they were intelligent and they were articulate, but I don't think they were exceptionally, they weren't exceptionally gifted. What they talked about and what they said over and over at the end was, tell other women they can do this too. It's not anything that's special and unique about us. That's what they said.
There's another question back for anyone on the panel or Amanda specifically.
Amanda was really directed towards you. Thank you very much for that. I found that really, really fascinating. And I really just wanted to ask a point of clarification because it seems to me that you weren't setting out to compare these women against neurotypical women or to compare these women against men. What you were setting out to do, I heard you saying what you were setting out to do was to present some kind of challenges to received wisdom, to the doom and gloom picture of autism, to maybe challenging some of the stereotypes about women and how these women had actually used some of their differences to succeed and to overcome obstacles. So am I right? Did I pick that up correctly?
Yeah, no, I didn't set out to compare, and I didn't set out to say, oh, let's look at women entirely. I looked at women mostly first because, they've been underlooked at. Women, I think, do have a different journey sometimes as adults, and I said, let's not confound it by looking at both together. Nobody's ever just looked at women very much, so I said, let's look at them first. I'm looking at men now, but not, it's going to be, I'm not going to be able to do a great comparison. It'd be more of a general thing, more looking at the men and of itself. Obviously, we need much bigger studies where we look at bigger groups. What I wanted to do was really find out what do they have to tell us that'll help us help other people. That's really what I wanted to know. And I think what the women said could help other young men, too.
Yeah, I agree.
I have no doubt it could. Yeah.
Would anyone like to add to that?
Helen, can I volunteer you to tell us a little bit about the Autism in Pink project?
Yes,
please.
The Autism in Pink project was something that was done a couple of years ago. It was looking at women on the spectrum in 4 different countries across the EU. So it was the UK, Lithuania, Spain and Portugal. And we were looking at quality of life and how we felt about the different domains from the PWI index. And what was coming out of that project, I was one of the UK participants, was very much that there were a lot of struggles, but there was a lot we could learn from each other as fellow women on the spectrum. There were a lot of strategies and coping methods that came out that were shared in the workshops and discussions. And actually, we were a lot stronger than we thought we were. When we were assessing ourselves at the end of the project, it was actually, no, we are better at this than we thought. We were, like the Australian women, judging ourselves against neurotypicals and coming up as failing. But if we judge ourselves by the boundaries we should judge ourselves, which is as autistic people, we are doing amazingly well.
Yeah.
And as one of the researchers involved in that project with Richard Mills and Sylvia Kenyon, I would endorse that. It really was quite an amazing experience meeting the women and talking through this. And just as you've said, Amanda, this was how they coped, how they learned strategies of managing their lives. But I seem to remember that social security, long-term security, was something you were all still very concerned about. And luckily, we are going to be following up that project in the next few months to find out what's happened over the 2 years in terms of quality of life, well-being, and how people have they been successful in finding employment. Because I think I'm right, Amanda, the folk in our project were not so successful in work placements.
As I said, that was probably the most, I don't know if it was them, their place, whatever. Most of them had figured out a way to create a pathway. Said several university professors, but anybody that works in university knows you can actually do that, and it's a really weird job, not like any other anyway, and you're on your own. So anyway, that was actually really suited to them, but they did say there's challenges they'd done to, one lady was this entertainer, one was a counselor, one was doing stuff teaching people. They were often doing things that didn't involve interacting with a lot of people on a regular basis. They could be who they could be.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience of diagnosing a number of people now, a number of women, all of them have done really very well. I'm very proud and very successful in their work achievements. Really has enabled them to feel that they can do the jobs that they want to do.
Sure.
It's been very positive.
But I think that was one of the key things that came out for me as an educationalist was the self-esteem, telling girls that they are absolutely incredible and they can do anything. And I think that is absolutely key, because if we can get that part right, their futures are very, very positive, especially when you get young girls that are very demand avoidant and very compliant and will often sort of quietly agree to things and actually don't have that self-esteem. And then suddenly you start working with a young girl and she knows that she's brilliant and she knows she's going to make it. And I think that was something I think is really important. If we bring that into the curriculum from our 5-year-olds, we're going to have a lot greater success. Do you agree with that, this whole self-esteem?
Yeah, definitely. I think a big part of succeeding as a female on the spectrum is about saying, no, I can do this, you're not going to stop me.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that I was taught when I was in my teens and starting to understand autism was the word yet. I can't do it yet. I'm not able to do that yet. And by bringing that word into it, it made the whole statement not a negative, oh, that'll never happen. It was no, I've got a goal towards now. I'm going to prove you wrong, and I am going to do it one day.
We actually have someone waiting very patiently to
That's
ask.
okay.
It's typical. We're all women. We're all chatting. So to stereotype women. So there's a lady there with a question.
Yes, I've got a question for Amanda. Before I ask my question, I wanted to say, firstly, that I found the talk very insightful, but I have to disagree with what the gentleman just said, that I do think that sex differences exist, which doesn't mean that it has to be limiting for people, but it also means that people who do conform to them, that there's nothing wrong with them. Like, I can relate more to these women that you've just been speaking about, but I think currently there's a bit of an atmosphere that more traditional, more typically feminine women or more typically masculine men, that there's like almost something wrong with them, and I think it shouldn't go, the pendulum shouldn't swing the other way. Like it wasn't okay in the past for women to be more this other way, like you described, or men, that I think now it's going the other direction. I think that's not good. But what I actually wanted to ask you was, when you spoke about the family relationships, especially those where the relationships of the parents weren't very good, I was wondering if there could be a reason that the parents maybe were also on the spectrum and weren't diagnosed, and so had problems of for themselves. Maybe I saw a book today on alcoholism as possibly a comorbidity or a coping mechanism. And I was wondering if you had explored this, or if you could do that in future research. Yes, whether it's a thing in parents, yeah.
My recollection, I'd have to look back at my notes, but my recollection was at least 2 of the women, maybe 3, talked about parents probably being on the spectrum. At least one of those that was a really problematic relationship, and I think that was one that it was really abusive, and like verbally and emotionally abusive, and there might have been some alcohol. The other one, though, it was a close relationship because it helped them to understand each other. So certainly, that issue of those things going through families, yeah, absolutely. And something definitely that ought to be looked at is this, I think, this whole idea of multi-generational families on the spectrum and how that impacts things. In my work with schools, I'm looking a lot at mothers on the spectrum and how they deal with schools for their children on the spectrum. Is that another issue besides just parents and things too? So the other thing I was going to add to the statement you made, the question the lady asked me about whether I would have found the same with neurotypical women, and my answer was no, and I do believe that. I actually think that the message these women sent, to me, is not a message that's just empowering for other women on the spectrum. To me, it's something that I would like my daughter, and I would have liked to have heard as a neurotypical adolescent girl who was so worried about success being traditional. So I think in some ways, the fact that these women were looking at success and achievements in a very different way would be something that all girls could learn from.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, we have another question, gentleman there.
Sorry, I think it's not a question, but probably a comment that it's a good idea to have positive expectations, as we say in NIS, but is there a danger if we always say, they can do it, so you can do it, kind of a slogan going in, because I cannot cycle, and I don't think I ever will, even with the yet, because I'm too old now. And it's important for people to realize also about what our strengths and limitations are. So while it's good to have that positive spin, whether it's for women or men or for anybody, it's also important to understand that kind of self-reflection. And I feel there's a danger in this whole idea of saying, as a woman, you can do it. I mean, that's my issue always has been with things like dyslexia campaign, when they show Tom Cruise can do it and you can do it. No, I can't be. So it's that fallacy almost of that argument, and being careful when we project those kind of views that we are diverse. We are a spectrum of human beings with our own strengths and weaknesses, and that's fine.
I agree with you 100%, but it's finding that thing that they themselves can succeed in, and they themselves can achieve in. I think you said there that not everybody is special, but I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's some things I would never do, however many people told me how wonderful I was as it. But it'd be nice for somebody to identify that thing in me that I could do, that perhaps Judy couldn't do, or something, and I think that's the key thing. The other thing also, I think, is coming out of the work that we're doing with girls and women, is that it can benefit all people. boys as well, and a lot of in education, a lot of our young men. I think the types of things that we're learning with our girls, we could be using with our young men as well. Yeah.
I think that we're emphasising this because the women just have been in the background and they've not been picked up. They've not been done. So yes, in a way, we may be overemphasising and being very, very positive. But I think it's necessary that we were, because they were not being recognised at all. So maybe we've got to have a balance now. We've raised the awareness. We're keeping making the points. And so I take your point. I think not everybody can be so successful.
Okay, it's Jude, I can see you, Jude, and then a lady at the back, and then you again, Katrina. You're going to have to wait. Okay, Jude.
I think as obviously more young people are going to be diagnosed earlier, and I think it's really important that we do aspire for them, and that we do give them that sense that they can achieve. And I have to say, I would disagree with you about telling people that they can do it, because I think it's really important that we do give them that message. And people aren't stupid. You know, people work out for themselves what they can and can't do. But when we say you can do it, we're saying you find the thing that's in you that you can do, that's uniquely you, and you can do that. And it's not us defining it, but it's them finding it for themselves.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jude. Does anyone want to respond to that? I think we all agree. I think we all agree. We all agree with that. It's a lady at the back. Oh, sorry, Helen.
No,
sorry.
I was just going to say, I think it's about making sure that if someone can't do something, it's because there's a genuine reason they can't do it. That we're not imposing a barrier saying you can't do it because you're autistic, you can't do it because you're a girl, you can't do it because we don't want you to. It's about not you can do anything you want, you can learn to fly one day, you can, become a pig one day. It's about you can do anything that you are capable of doing, no one is going to stop you. That's the message we want to give them.
Okay, lady at the back.
Thank you. Mine's a two-part question. As a clinician and also the mother of a teenager with Asperger's, teenage daughter, is there evidence that suggests women with autism are more prone to sexual assault and unhealthy relationships? And as a mum, how do I prepare my teenager for the world of relationships without terrifying her?
Well, there's certainly a lot of research to show that individuals on the spectrum are more prone to bullying. Yeah. And there's other research that shows that women are more prone to sexual abuse as a form of aggression. So I guess I don't know the research on women with sexual abuse on the spectrum. I don't know if that's really been looked at. But certainly if you put together that people on the spectrum are more likely to be bullied and be victims of aggression and attacks, and women in general are more likely to be sexual abuse, women that are at risk, put those together, yeah, I would say there was. What came across strongly with these women when they were young, they would make bad choices, put themselves in situations where they didn't want to get out. But I do know the research on women and young girls and sexual, bad things. And a lot of young girls are making bad decisions, and it's something that girls do that guys don't. So,
One of the things that came out from some of the research I've been involved in is it's conflict avoidance. The women are wanting to avoid the conflict that comes through saying no. So we just kind of go along with it even though we don't want to do it. That's where a lot of the vulnerability is coming from. I don't know if there's any specific research into that, but there's some very good books out there about vulnerability and how to protect yourself and how to stay safe.
Yeah. And I think the key thing is to give our young girls the skills to understand the sort of social subtleties that sometimes they don't pick up. A lot of people with autism have written quite a lot on this, sort of things like if somebody invites you back to have some coffee at 10 o'clock in the morning, it has a different message, subtle message, than 11 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. It's those sort of things that we really need to teach our girls, because, of course, they won't pick that up. Yeah. Mm. And I think being completely and utterly honest, but as you say, not terrifying your daughter. But Robin Stewart has written a really good book, and there are a number of books out there. And I've also noticed that with our teenagers, they prefer to read it than to actually get the lecture from us. And so sort of reading these books, sort of familiarising themselves and sort of learning that way. But I do think we need to give our young people, you know, sort of the skills to deal with those very complex issues.
I would just add there's a young woman, a young Scottish woman called Debbie Brown, who's written a book called The Aspie Girl's Guide to Being Safe with Men, and her rationale for writing the book was it was the book she didn't want to write. It was all the things that had worried her and bothered her that she knew would bother other young women and girls. So I would recommend it's written very directly, very graphically, and
factual,
and very appropriately. Yeah. So yeah, Katrina, you had another question.
Well, it was less a question, and really I wanted to just back up what Judith said about the importance of raising issues specifically around women. The peer support group that I run in Scotland, we do have women coming to that who sit in absolute awe, and at the end of the meetings go, I've never met another woman like me before. And it's very moving, but it's that sense of validity and a sense of identity can be incredibly powerful for people. And the only other thing I really wanted to say was, two things. The other thing is the question that was just raised there about vulnerability and abuse. That's one very specific reason why women do have specific needs and they can get pregnant, and that brings about its own issues. But the other comment I wanted to make was it just seems to me it's really very much about insight. And we're only going to achieve that insight if we do talk and we do raise issues and we do allow women and girls their voices and to be allowed to describe their specific experiences. But it all comes down to insight. It comes down to insight about your own strengths and your own challenges. And that's it. I'm sorry, it wasn't a question. It was a.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. That's a great contribution. There's someone here. Yes.
Yeah. Hi. I'm a single mother to a young man with autism, and when my health broke down as a result of my complex caring role, after about 10-12 years I went back to work and I set up a childcare service to support families with young children with autism, and I come into a lot of contact with families where there is sort of several generations of history of autism, even though it wasn't diagnosed as autism. I'm currently working with a family in North Wales where mum, at the age of 36, got a private diagnosis, and grandma has gone through a health service assessment and diagnosis, and their 10-year-old daughter and granddaughter has been privately assessed by an incredible clinician without question as being on the autism spectrum. However, the local CAMS team would not assess this child. So mum, being on the autism spectrum, she went and quite rightly paid privately and didn't buy the diagnosis, but quite rightly got the diagnosis. And the CAMS team then decided that they would do an assessment and still found the child to be not on the autism spectrum. And this child is 10 and she'll be going to high school next year. And the family are desperate now to see this child. Almost, does she have to wait for the child to break down before, this can actually be diagnosed by the local CAMS team? And it's really quite worrying because I have worked with this child, I have supported this child, I have no doubts that this child is on the autism spectrum. However, the CAMS team just seem to dig their heels in and are refusing to recognise the female autism, which is really quite shocking.
I'm afraid this is a very familiar story. We come across this a lot. As you know and are aware, at the Lawn and Wing Centre, we specialise in diagnosing of women and girls on the spectrum. And to my dismay, I've recently seen someone, and the very same story. If we're not assessed by the local CAMS team, we will not get services because it was a private assessment. Now, isn't this a waste of public resources and time in our NHS is currently struggling of not accepting diagnoses that have not been carried out by CAMS teams. And of course, raising awareness and understanding of the diagnosis is still very patchy where you live. And I think we've had speakers I've listened to today where we've talked about diagnostic assessments and interviews and how do people assess, how do they know what the female presentation is. And the point I want to make is that it isn't gender specific. The criteria for diagnosis are the same for boys and girls, men and women, but it's how you ask the questions and how you know about the behavioral phenotype of the women is different from the men. Yeah. They are more social, their routines, their special interests are different. And if you have not got an experienced clinician who understands the female presentation of autism, you won't get a diagnosis. And if they rely on assessments and criteria like DSM-5 and ICD-10, then you really are in trouble. So, yeah, we're working on teams, and we encourage people to come to learn about our methods of diagnosis. But, you know, we've still got a long way to go, and I really do understand what you're saying and appreciate your problem. But you've got to keep. Oh, sorry. I'm getting excited. I just can't see the lady, that's why I'm moving.
But Judith, can I just say, though, the actual assessment report, all the scores are actually above the cut-off point. And it's the school that's saying she doesn't present with any problems in school, but this child melts down the minute she walks out the school gates.
I just despair. Listen to what parents are saying, because they know best, and we know all people on the autism spectrum behave differently in different environments. And the girls are particularly good at masking. They keep under the radar at school, they don't present with problems, and once they get home, that's when they really show the stress and anxiety and the exhaustion of keeping up these social skills that they're finding problems.
But how can I understand all what you say, I understand what everybody said, but I'm at the point of breaking down now, because I don't want to see that child be that child that fails, because when she goes to high school, which is next September, they've said they'll reassess her in 2 to 3 years' time, but where's she going to be then? You know, she might not even be in school then. You know, I just, can I speak to somebody privately? Because I really don't know where to go with this.
Maybe talk to me later. Yeah? Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. A gentleman at the back.
I want to thank you for this beautiful meeting. I'm suffering from Asperger too, and I am from the board of Autism Europe. And I can tell you that now for the first time we have a young man who is suffering from Asperger, who is vice president. And in short time, he will be accompanied by a young woman, Monique. She is also suffering from Asperger. So we make progress. But I have a question. I'm an old man, and I'm very much worrying about situation in the world. What these macho men like Trump and Putin, and what has happened in Brazil with the president, and what in Europe is with Wilders in my country, in the Netherlands, and what these men, these very right-wing macho men are doing. I am afraid of that. But you are much more from your perspective as woman looking to that. What do you think about my worrying? Are you agree? How can we fight them as much as possible? But what do you think?
I think your concern is actually about men rather than women. You've got
about these extremely right-wing politicians like Trump and Putin and Wilders in my country, and these populist neo-fascist men, what they are doing. And
I think there is a worry that some people are going backwards in how they think about women. I think what we need to do as a community and stand up and say we're not going to take that. We are not going to go backwards. We're going to keep going forward. We need women on the spectrum out there in the public talking, running for offices, running for positions and saying, we will do this, we will achieve, you're not going to stop us.
Well done.
That's a great answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that question. I know Hazel in the middle is holding a... Sorry, I just happen to know a few people here, so if I don't know your name, it's nothing personal, but Hazel, would you want to...
Amanda, just to say that my daughter's 14 in an autistic spectrum, and I love the sort of long-term positive outcomes that you had with a lot of the women that you worked with, but they all had late diagnosis, and they all said that was a very pivotal moment in their life. Now, they did have success, but they had probably more than your average challenges and things along the way. Did they think, or did any ladies get the impression from the ladies that they worked with, if they had their diagnosis younger, life would have been easier? Did
they think if they got it earlier, their life would have been easier?
They would have understood themselves better.
They overwhelmingly said the girls should get diagnosed earlier.
Yes.
Yeah. So they did. I don't know so much because everybody would have done things different. I think they just felt they would have had a better sense of themselves.
Yeah.
It was more about how they saw themselves, I think, more than anything. That's what they talked about. But no, that was one of their biggest recommendations was people should get diagnosed earlier. Yeah.
Good, thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks. There's a lady at the back. Yes.
Hi. God, that's loud.
It's not loud to us.
I have a comment based on Amanda's speech. I really enjoyed your speech, and I can really relate to everything that you were talking about. In answer to that lady's question down below, I feel that if I'd had a diagnosis earlier, it would have not only helped me a lot more, but it would certainly have helped my mother and the rest of my family to understand me a bit better. But I have another comment. I wrote it down because I was really nervous, sorry. So obviously I can only speak for myself, but I found my diagnosis to be very empowering. And in the past, like you said, Amanda, I have had lots of abusive relationships and a lot of crisis which I've overcome. And I've always been quite hard on myself. So after my diagnosis, I had to learn to be kinder to myself. And in relation to what you were talking about success, I find that I have to redefine what success is for me every day. So like some days it's just getting out of bed and getting washed and dressed, and then if I sit and watch telly all day, I'm okay. That was a good day. And some days it's completing really complex pieces of work that I have to do through my job. Today, because I volunteered all day yesterday, I haven't managed to speak to anybody all day. This is the first I've spoken today. But my success today has just been getting through the day to 6 o'clock, so that, I did it. So I think that it is important that we think about our successes, but they do change every day based on how we're feeling emotionally and what we can cope with. Yeah, that's me.
Yes. Thank you. That was a lovely and very appropriate contribution to this idea of positivity. We need to keep that going. I believe there's someone over. Yes.
Yes, hello. I nearly forgot my question over all the interesting discussions, but actually it ties in quite well now with the previous comment. So I wanted to ask, you mentioned in your presentation that the women went through sort of a couple of months after their diagnosis of questioning it and redefining their identity and finding that identity. And then, as the previous commentator said, reframing what success meant for them as individuals. My question leading on from that was to what extent they also found it helpful to then be open about their diagnosis and make other people redefine success for them, whether all of them were, what their experiences were. I think there were a couple of comments by people who spoke to colleagues at work or boss, and then maybe getting a different kind of validation from your environment as well will help you feel more successful.
I think your question is, did they influence others to redefine what success was? Is that the essence of your question?
Yes, so my question was, first of all, how many of those women were then really open about their diagnosis to their environment, to colleagues, to friends, and whether, so if they were, whether the fact that their environment knew about their difficulties and could then also reframe success for them, whether that helped them.
Okay,
does that make sense?
Yeah, in two ways. So most of them talked about revealing their diagnosis to a close family member or friend if they had them, and that more, helped them to have that understanding and to help each other. But as far as helping others and really defining success, some of the women, as I said, were writers, and a couple of them have written books. So they've gone, where they really had moved into was that space of helping others and writing their experiences. As I said, they learned a lot by reading about others, so now they're trying to give back and show these possibilities. So I think in that sense, they are doing that about redefining success. As far as writing about their experiences and showcasing and talking, and some of them do that as well. So I think, yes, in that sense, so that giving back to others and now helping others was very important.
Yeah, I guess what I meant as well was whether, so for example, if parents were struggling to understand why their children are struggling, whether the diagnosis then also helped the parents to redefine success for their child.
Yeah, and I think that is not something they talk about directly, but I think it's very important. And I know certainly one of the messages for me, I deal with parents, and for good reasons, who are very hesitant to get their child diagnosed because of their fears of stigmatization, limitation, labeling. And that does happen, unfortunately. But I think one of the things that these women, of course, what came out of the story was that the diagnosis, the positive side of the diagnosis far outweighed the negatives they experienced in any of that other stuff. So to me, there was a real message for parents about, and I say this to parents all the time, should we get our child diagnosed? And I said, well, if we really think it's appropriate, I've never met an adult who said they were sorry they were diagnosed, but I've met a lot of adults who were sorry they didn't get diagnosed earlier. So again, yes, I think it's about that reconceptualization of yourself, so then that helps with the reconceptualization of success. Because what you're doing is you're saying, oh, well, it's not, I've just got these issues. It's okay if I'm different, and I'm going to be experiencing things different anyway. So, yeah, I think hopefully it will do that. They didn't talk about it as directly, but hopefully it will do that, yeah.
I think from personal experience, I've always disclosed to employers, and I force the HR department to change the standards I'm assessed on for my personal appraisal, because I don't think it's fair that I'm judged on the same standards of communication and sociability as my neurotypical colleagues. And slowly, more and more people in working environments are doing that, and we are making HR as an organisation, as a community, start to realise that not everyone can be judged by the same standards. And the more that people speak up, the more that sort of the big wider world that is HR and employment will begin to judge people by their individualised standards, by their individual goals and successes and targets.
A great point. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Jane Verity. I'm here on behalf of Aberdeenshire Council. And one of the questions, or more of a statement, I'm not really sure where it's going at the minute, is the young people that are dropping out of high school, dropping out of education. What's happening to those young people, especially the young women that are not necessarily being picked up on by other services? It's quite easy to kind of, let them have an excuse and then not follow them up. It becomes quite difficult. And we're being presented more and more with, especially young women that are dropping out of education. And I was starting to think it was maybe just in our area, but hearing you say that it's more across the board is refreshing in one way, but not in another way, because obviously there is a swathe of maybe up to 20-30% of young women that are dropping out, and what's happening to them whilst they've dropped out. I suppose that's what my question is.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly the research shows that's where that gloom and doom picture of the outcomes for adults is. I mean, there hasn't been a heck of a lot of studies just looking at women, but certainly the picture of adults on the spectrum is that, a lot more on assistance. They're having medical and mental health problems because of high rates of anxiety and depression. There's a higher rate of suicide. That's what's happening, is they're falling off the radar. Now, it's interesting because one of the things I'm interested in the redefining success is if we want to get funding as researchers in universities from the government, one of the surest ways to do it is to point out all the ways that they're having to pay money out because they're failing to pay attention. So, you know, you start showing them all the economic problems that are happening because these people are dropping out, and you start getting their attention. And that's how we sort of can get them to get on the board sometimes to give us money to look into these things, but unfortunately that's what it takes.
Jackie, do you want to add
I'm just
anything
saying,
from an
unfortunately,
education?
a lot of the girls that are dropping out, this is some of the girls without a diagnosis. So they're not being picked up, so the stats are really difficult as well. Also, there's very small level of women with a diagnosis who are actually in employment. You know, so it goes all the way along the line, and it really is a concern. And as I say, if the girls are not getting a diagnosis, they're dropping out of school, we're just not going to pick them up. And that is really a worry, because that's a whole lot of expertise that we're not tapping into, and we're losing young people. Same is happening with boys. So it is a worry. Yeah.
There's, I think, one final hand up there, I think, and then I think we can draw the discussion to a close. Would you like to make your comment or ask your question?
Yeah. Hi. I also really enjoyed the presentation earlier, and as an autistic person myself, I totally understand the grief pretty much a lot of us feel about not getting a diagnosis when we're younger, which is pretty much, I think, how a lot of us feel. But on a slightly different topic, in regards to women and girls and autism, a lot of how such gets talked about is very gender essentialist, and women are this thing biologically, male are this thing biologically, and there's only women and men, and it completely ignores trans people when there are a lot of trans people in the autistic populations and vice versa. Statistics show such. And those of us that are non-binary, like myself, basically, how can we make sure that when talking about women and girls, that we're not just assuming, pretty much using language that is decades dated about what women are, and how can we ensure we're including all non-men, those people that are women and non-binary and trans women, and anyone that isn't the standard cis male.
Can I come in here? Yeah, absolutely agree with you. And tomorrow, I think we've got some workshops on this subject, have we not, Carol? Yeah. So tomorrow it isn't that we're not thinking about it. It's very much a topic at the moment, and we will be go tomorrow and you can ask the questions. But we agree that this is. It's very much part of our understanding. It's not straightforward at all. The whole business about identity, I think this is what you were saying, Amanda, of knowing who you are and where you fit, and the whole business about sexuality is a topic that we are just beginning to do good research, beginning to understand, or trying to understand. It's a very valid point.
I think the point you made about using outdated terminology, though, that's what we're talking about. Autism is still using outdated terminology and stereotypes. Women are still being judged by outdated stereotypes. Yeah. Every part of this needs updating, not just the gender language and the autism language, but the whole world needs to update its ideas about what people can be.
Good point. Yeah. Good point. Yes.
Okay. I think that's an appropriate point to end on. I am just going to be cheeky and take chair's privilege a little bit here, because actually many of the panel here have contributed to Scottish Autism's Women and Girls Online programme, which is a resource where women can go and see other women and hear their challenges and their successes. And if you want to drop by stand 16, there's information about that. It's free to use and register, and Jackie and Judy have contributed to it, and Katrina, who has been active in the discussion, was the academic inspiration for it. So there are some resources out there, and we do actually have issues around transgender on there as well. So can I just say an enormous thank you to Amanda, who trooped on and gave a really obviously thought-provoking, and stimulating conversation. And And to this lovely trio of fabulous women who stepped in and kept the discussion alive, and to you for your fabulous questions and your comments. Enjoy your Saturday evening in Edinburgh. There are many delights to take part in, and we'll see you all tomorrow morning. Thank you.